Hey, you almost hit me with that time machine? Man. Whoa, sorry about that. Didn't see you there? So, you're headed to the future. Huh, well, before you go all the way, why don't you stick around for a minute and check out this totally sweet ride from the past? Yeah, that's right. You heard the big lug. This here is the very first automobile ever created, or at least one of them. And it's coming to you live from the 1890s. At the fair, the Duryea brothers showed off their motor wagon to a handful of people, including a representative from Scientific American magazine. He was impressed enough to publish a report in the magazine, which in turn caught the attention of wealthy businessman J.P. Morgan. Morgan, intrigued by the possibility of investing in such a new and untried industry, offered to invest $100,000 into the company and safely engage the engine to the transmission without having to stop the car first. To say the model was a success would be an understatement. The Duryea brothers sold their Model A's in short order, with one beer even purchasing a second car for his wife to drive. Not only that, but the publicity from the World's Fair caused several other wealthy New Yorkers to contact the brothers about building them their own motor wagons. They built 11 of these new cars, which they designated as Model B, and were ready to enter the next phase of their company's growth. But he wasn't done yet. He brought in former carriage maker Andrew Lawler to oversee manufacturing and production. Everything seemed to be going well for the company, but behind the scenes, problems were beginning to develop. The relationship between Charles Duryea and J.W. Vallandigham was deteriorating, and Charles was becoming increasingly concerned about the direction of the company. Not only did they build the first automobile in the United States, but they also helped pave the way for the mass production of automobiles and introduced several innovative features that would become staples of the automotive industry. Let us know what you think we should cover in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more historical tales from the early days of automobiles. Until next time, I'll see you later. From the clutch to the frame, the Duryea brothers and their team of designers helped shape the automobile into what we know it today. And for that, they deserve our thanks and our admiration. Vallandigham had been pushing for the company to focus more on luxury cars rather than the more affordable models that Charles preferred. Charles felt that the company was straying from its mission, and he was determined to get it back on track and to help design new models of the Duryea automobile. Together, the five men would guide the Duryea Motor Wagon Company through its next phase of development, introducing several new models and making improvements to their existing line. But the brothers had a decision to make. Up until this point, the company had been run solely by Charles Duryea. He was the face of the company and had been since its inception. But now the company was growing, and he knew that he couldn't do it all himself. He needed to bring in new management to help him run the company. With funding secured, the brothers set up shop in a new factory on West 42nd Street in Manhattan. In 1897, they moved to a larger facility in New Jersey and began producing more cars for sale to the public. They also began experimenting with a new design for their cars. In 1902, Veldkamp and Lawler would form the Commonwealth Automobile Company in New England, which would go on to produce the Stevens Duryea automobile. Meanwhile, the Duryea Motor Wagon Company would continue to produce cars under Charles Duryea's direction until 1904. The company would eventually be sold to investors in 1909, who would rename it the Duryea Motor Company. Production would end in 1914, marking the end of the original Duryea Motor Wagon Company. Up until this point, most automobiles were built on a custom basis, meaning that each car was essentially unique. But the Duryea brothers wanted to change that. Now, you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, didn't automobiles just pop into existence fully formed like Athena from Zeus's head? But there was one problem. They didn't have a standardized chassis to build their cars on. Most automakers of the time used a running board as the foundation for their vehicles, but the Duryea brothers knew that they needed something stronger, something that could better support the weight of their car and allow them to increase the power of their engine. What they needed was a frame. Although the cars were manufactured in New York City, the parts for the Model A came from all over. With their new frame, the Duryea brothers were able to increase the horsepower of their vehicles to 12 and raise their top speed to 35 miles per hour. With a more powerful engine, the Duryea brothers were also able to create a new clutch that was much easier to operate. This clutch was a major improvement over the earlier version and became a staple of early automobiles. The engine was produced by the B.F. Goodrich Rubber Company. The transmission was made by the Knowles Gear Company from Holyoke, Massachusetts, and the wheels were manufactured by the Sprague Electric and Manufacturing Company from New England. The company would continue to source parts from outside manufacturers for some time until they could produce enough components in-house. Well, not exactly. By the end of 1896, they had produced for Model A motor wagons, each with a 4 and A to horsepower engine and a top speed of 20 miles per hour. The bodies of the cars were constructed from ashwood frames covered with sheet metal and leather. And although the Model A looked a bit awkward, with contemporaries comparing it to a baby coach or a beer wagon, it was technically sound. It featured a 2-cylinder, 4-stroke engine with a cast iron cylinder block and aluminum pistons. The engine sat in front of the vehicle's rear axle and was connected to a 2-speed gearbox, which drove the rear wheels. It's time for this week's episode of. The year is 1893 and you find yourself in the East Room of the New York World S Fair. They'd been fascinated by vehicles since they were young and had spent their careers designing engines for various companies. But now they wanted to build something of their own. Now, while they were not the first to experiment with creating an automobile, they would go on to become the first American manufacturer of automobiles. In fact, they would go on to make this very car in the shed at the fair, which would come to be known as the Duryea Motor Wagon. The fair is celebrating its first year in its brand new and enormous Madison Square Garden building, which was considered to be the largest indoor exhibition space in the world. Inside are wonders of technology from around the globe. There are exhibits from the Singer Manufacturing Company showing the latest in sewing machines and a fully operating model of the Eiffel Tower. But tucked away in a far corner is a small wooden shed with hardly anyone taking notice. And inside that shed is the very first successful gas-powered car built in the United States. There were quite a few folks working on developing the first automobile around this time period, most notably Carl Benz in Germany, who developed the first practical gasoline-powered four-wheel vehicle. But in America, several inventors were working on their own versions of the automobile. And today, we're going to look at how these pioneers brought the first automobile to the United States. So pull on your goggles, grab your spats, and get ready to take a ride back to the 1890s. Earlier, that same year in January, brothers Charles and Frank Duryea had been tinkering around in their workshop in Springfield, Ohio. It was far from the most elegant vehicle and was even criticized for being ugly. But it was the first of many American-made automobiles and ushered in a new era of transportation. In no time, they had set up production on their first automobile, which would be known as the Model A. Like most manufacturers of the day, the Duryea brothers took a fairly hands-on approach to building their automobiles, building each car largely by hand and testing them on the streets of Manhattan. But perhaps the most important feature of the car was its clutch, which allowed the driver to smoothly, and so in 1896, the Duryea Motor Wagon Company was born. Over the next few years, the company grew rapidly. They wanted to create a standardized automobile that could be mass-produced in greater numbers than any car before it. Using input from their engineer, J.W. Voltaik, the Duryea brothers designed a sturdy frame that would support the weight of the car and allow for a more powerful engine. Using their new frame, engine, and clutch, the Duryea brothers were finally able to produce the standardized car they had been envisioning. He brought in his brother Frank to serve as the company's general manager and hired attorney J.W. Voltaik as secretary and treasurer. By 1900, the company had introduced a new 16-horsepower model and had opened a new factory in Kenosha, Wisconsin, to keep up with demand. But it was too late. Vallandigham had already made plans to leave the company and form his own auto company with Andrew Lawler. Although the company would eventually fade into obscurity, their impact on the automotive industry would be monumental. So, what should we talk about next? Do you want to hear about the Ford Model T? How about the first prototype for the Model T?